from the blackest corners of your mind, they call, pulling you deep into shadow, twisting your senses, keeping you from sleep. It's time to face your darkest fears. This is Tales to Terrify. Good evening, children of the night, and welcome. This week I'd like to share our deepest, darkest thanks with the newest patron to join us behind the veil, Clovis. Thank you so much for lending your shadow to our darkness, Clovis. Your generosity truly sends a shiver down our spines. Speaking of Patreon, this last weekend we released the latest in our author interview series, where Seth chats with regular contributor to the show, Amanda Cecilia Lang. Join us on Patreon for a glimpse into the dark mind behind favorite stories like The Clover Cafe and Snake and Sinew, Flame and Bone. Also, we recently gave away a handful of copies of Amanda's newest collection, Saturday Fright at the Movies, 13 Tales from the Multiplex. If you didn't net yourself a copy, I'd still highly recommend that you pick one up. Link is in the show notes. And of course, make sure you tune into our Patreon feed and get to know Amanda a little better, if you dare. We have one tale for you this evening about a pregnant young woman who channels the frustrations of her strict upbringing into baking and devouring the results. Our story tonight comes to us from Nicoletta Giuseffi. Nicoletta Giuseffi is a pansexual English language professor and princess under glass. She writes fantasy and horror, with work appearing in publications like Moonflowers and Nightshade and Mother, Tales of Love and Terror, which was nominated for a 2022 Bram Stoker Award. She received the Elegant Literature Prize in December of 22. Her passions include photography, retro media and hardware, and the late 18th century. Children of the night, join me for Nicoletta Giuseffi's One in the Oven, a Tales to Terrify original.
I began to entertain notions of baking myself into a cake when I first became pregnant. Perhaps it was the incessant drone of fair-weather friends and distant family insisting I had a bun in the oven, when what I had was a parasite vying against me for life. Even strangers treated me like pastry, fragile and sensitive to temperature. While my feet swelled like dough and my breasts rose into yeasty humps, I fantasized about sliding myself into an industrial oven until I bubbled and turned crisp. I realized I had been carrying a version of these thoughts since my suburban Sunday school girlhood, where I had always felt like an ingredient in a greater recipe. I was something to be eaten up, said one counselor at a chastity camp. I dated boys who licked my neck in the movie theater, and friends drunk on bottles of vanilla extract pushed me to sit in the lap of a family friend who kneaded me like cookie dough. During my brief flirtation with cooking school years ago, one of my instructors groped my thigh like a piping bag. These comparisons had been going on all my life, But now I was determined to finally make something of myself. It was unavoidable. I quietly purchased a few cake books to see if it would satiate the bizarre sentiment I had been slavering over. I brought the books on a visit to my parents a few hours' drive north through a wooded area that would have been scenic if I ever had the stomach to pause and admire it. I had risen at 5 to finish preparations and threw everything in the car, including making a fine cake and the fantastic cookbook for fans of fantasy. A full throat of morning sickness was welling up within me, but I had to drive if I was to make it in time for lunch with my mother and father. When I arrived after countless stops to relieve my creaking bladder, I stood on the sidewalk staring at the willow trees behind the house. They had been my childhood friends. What would they think to see me now? "These are lovely," said my mother. She was pawing through the bright, colorful cake books on the kitchen island and clucking with approval. "Only halfway into your pregnancy and you're already feeling those domestic urges. Isn't that great?" She wanted the baby more than I did. "God really does work in mysterious ways. He leads us where we need to go, not where we want to go." "Excuse me," I muttered, and hurried off to the hall bathroom to vomit. I ran the faucet to cover the sound, but I couldn't keep from screaming out my insides and the remnants of a cereal bar hastily scarfed that morning. I couldn't even think of lunch, and already I was hearing preparations come knocking about from the kitchen as my mother wielded pots and pans with the whimsy of a poltergeist. I treasured every second alone inside the cubicle of powder blue wallpaper. I looked in the mirror and told myself I would eat my mother's cooking, and father would, and we would be a happy family unit. My tongue automatically licked a stray morsel of vomit from my lower lip. My first course was a slap from my aging father when I forgot to say grace. We were seated in the dining room with plates arrayed on the green paisley tablecloth, and dappling sunlight was coming in through the white blinds on the windows. While I was still reeling from the blow, which had been gentler than when I was a girl, my father crammed his fingers together and grumbled about the Holy Spirit over trays of cucumber sandwiches and cold macaroni and Cobb salad. I quaffed half an eagerly awaited lime spritzer, only to find it was a virgin like I had been before my miracle of conception. "Amen. You're still working at that place, what is it?" "The furniture store." "Yes, sales associate, remember? I spend all day begging strangers to buy couches outside their budgets." "Good honest work," Dad assessed, spreading an alarming amount of yellow butter on a roll. "But it's man's work. Not just my opinion. I'm listening to these podcasts, you know, and they've got fair points about what women are doing to themselves these days." My father was a greasy sort of 50, with flat, uncombed brown hair and a mustache several decades out of date. Although my mother was perfectly coiffed in a form-fitting white dress and pink heels, he wore shabby flannel and denim, which did not seem to come clean even after washing. I had inherited his chocolate cake batter eyes. "Well, Dad, I'd love to not work, maybe go back to cooking school, but—" "College? In your mid-20s? Only reason girls go is to get with men. Nah, you're better off meeting a man on the job. I'll bet you sell a lot more sofas when you smile." "I met a man at work. He raped me, and now I'm carrying his child." "Damn it, Hope, not at the table!" I had achieved a heavy, satisfying silence. Then my mother cleared her throat and said, "It's a pity they can't find him. Maybe if they could, the two of you could reconcile and make a happy family. Heaven knows you need it." My parents provided everything but love. but they had recently begun to pull the rug out from under me now that I was working and living on my own. I sat there basking like a beached whale in their conversation about what a blessing my pregnancy was, and all I could think about was cake. So, when my mother left and returned with a spice cake dressed in ribbons of piped caramel, I cut myself a heaping slice to rival Dad's. If I was going to make my own cake, I needed something to work with. Don't mind me, I'm eating for two now. Happy out-of-state abortion seemed like the right choice for the message on the cake I had promised to make for the baby shower, but I wasn't certain I could go through with it. I had been reading first-hand accounts on message boards from young women who had suffered the loss all alone and had the bruises to show for it. The walk to the clinic was the walk of the condemned. Through wire fences and hurled pamphlets, invectives and first stones. I didn't want to make that walk knowing I had no one to shield me. Besides, it was far too late in the game. Whatever was inside me probably already had a soul, or whatever the modern equivalent was. Aspirations to become an influencer, perhaps? I decided it would be best to prepare a test cake or two before the baby shower. I hadn't baked in a long time, and I wasn't sure I remembered how. After skimming the cake books, I quickly realized I would need more equipment than I owned, so I took my wallet full of plastic to the kitchen section of a nearby big-box department store. There, in the appliance aisle, I bumped into another pregnant woman, not so far along as me, who marveled at my unseemly belly and placed a hand on her own as if to say, "My goodness, is that what's in store for me?" She was wearing a ruffled blouse and gold bracelets dangled on her wrists, like she was an escaped convict carrying around her broken bindings. My eyes lingered on her hands as she spoke to me. "Excuse me, sorry about that. What are the odds we're both pregnant, right?" Her right had the air of caution. She was prepared for me to say I was simply fat. I can barely keep track of myself now that I'm so big, I laughed. Too much? Did I sound unhinged just then? I'm too focused on getting this mixer. Oh, my wife knows a ton about those. I'm just here for a baking sheet. Does your partner like baking too? Her assumption was innocent, but it cut me to my bleeding center of raspberry filling, and I caught myself letting my jaw hang. What was I supposed to say? That I was an oven for a bun I had no claim to? That the conception was a hit and run? Instead, I said, "No, he's sort of a health nut," and turned my face toward the wall of products so she couldn't see me wincing. Too bad. We love baking. Bread, cookies, and of course our favorite cake. Yeah? What kind of cake do you like? It's embarrassing, she hedged. You know that confetti stuff? It's usually white cake with sprinkles baked into it. Rainbow polka dots, that sort of thing. Never heard of it, I lied. I try to experiment with European pastry as much as I can. Ladyfingers, cannelés, gâteau opéra. After I got into them, I couldn't go back to those store-bought mixes like we had when we were kids. She was a little younger than me, bright-eyed with a real smile, so why did I condescend with false elitism to scare her away? I didn't make those things. I hadn't learned how, and I had abandoned my dreams of doing so when I left cooking school. Impressive. She crouched to drag a baking sheet out of its place on the middle shelf and slid it under her arm. Good luck, but you sound like such a pro you won't need it. Be seeing you. I wanted to apologize, to say I was nervous, but I said nothing as she disappeared beyond the aisle. I was left there alone with my shame, and a $300 stand mixer in candy pink, the color of my fingernails. My polish was flaking away like my resolve. I pushed the box off the shelf and into my cart, then slowly paced toward the grocery section to pick up a few things. I came home and lined up a dozen boxes of confetti cake mix on the counter, pleased to obscure the guilty black grout between my white tiles. There were 12 doughboys staring back at me, 24 black pinpoint eyes seeing through me. I thought they resembled what my baby must have looked like inside me. Pale, unformed, unfinished. After I put away the milk and the eggs, I took one of the boxes, read the instructions on the back, and started laughing like a cornered hyena. Comparing the simple directions to the complicated artifice in the cookbooks I had purchased in my foolhardy pride demoralized me enough that I began to rethink my whole plan. I wanted to disappear and take my baby with me. I wanted to dissolve like sponge cake in the rain and run in rivulets of icing to the gutter. For the next few months, I baked prosaic box cakes, the only sort my skills could manifest. I mixed them in that elaborate machine, which was the same as using a fountain pen to write a filthy limerick. It was practice, all practice, and soon I'd crack open one of my books and make a true monstrosity of layers and fondant sculptures, the kind presented ad nauseum on the cooking channels. The parade of elevated pastries they featured appeared like phantoms after jumps in time and countless staff interventions beyond that of the host perfecting and styling the food for final presentation. Just how many extra hands did it take behind the scenes to make the host's millefeuille look meal enough? How many times had the hot studio lights melted the candles on Giada's essential Italian birthday cake into bloody clumps of wax cooled in buttercream icing before they finally got the perfect take? I goaded myself into eating cake after cake. My days were filled with them. I woke up with a slice buried under cream cheese frosting, dappled with sprinkles, out of a can, of course. I worked 8 bleary hours and, halfway through, opened my plasticware to find a thick slice crammed inside waiting for me. As I grew more familiar with the flavor of cloying sweet buttressed by fat and more sugar, I began to imagine these slices were daring me to grow disgusted with them, to grow overwhelmed, but I never did. The frozen dinners sitting in my refrigerator would never be thawed, while I had fresh cake waiting to be reheated to room temperature and enjoyed in front of another episode of some cawing cardboard country cutout of a woman talking incessantly about the men in her life while she cooked up the victuals. She had to have been engineered. The teeth, the eyes, the makeup, they were all real, but the life and the vernacular and the appearance of happiness must have been the insidious product of writers, not the dizzyingly happy marriage she insisted between the occasional single-frame grimace. Some mania, perhaps hormonal in origin, drove me back to the store to load my cart with cake mix and canned frosting whenever my stock ran low. When I weighed myself on a whim, I realized I hadn't gained an ounce. I began to entertain the worst theories during my insomniac pacing through my dark apartment while the television blared cooking show reruns. I wasn't gaining weight because, like a tree-eating monk, I was replacing myself with flour and sugar, with oil and with eggs. My bones, ground by hand, would fall like powder into mixing bowls, while my grease-laden blood flowed into the gleaming measuring cup held by the smiling woman on the screen, whose breath-mint white teeth seemed to cover her entire face. To add stability and moisture, she'd crack my hard-shelled ovaries on the rim, and the camera would zoom in to show the luxurious dark yolk speckled with dots of blood like confetti sprinkles. This transformation continued until the day of my baby shower. My mother had taken care of the planning, and the party was to occur at my parents' house and not my cheap, dingy apartment. Relief is a strange emotion. It creeps in clinging to the underbelly of otherwise horrible circumstances by the grace of simplicity. For example, I would have been relieved if I had taken ill and lost the baby. I would have been sad, devastated, but I'd be free. As it was, I didn't have to cover the house in pink streamers and flowers. Didn't have to arrange chairs and plan games. But I did have to suffer the company of my mother and her friends prodding me and asking how my little girl was doing. I didn't know the sex of the baby, didn't bother to ask the doctor, but my mother had been calling it a girl since the first trimester, and I didn't have the heart to tell her what was happening to it. The first sound I heard upon entering the house was the tinny plinking of a lullaby. Mother and her friends were gathered around an ornate porcelain unicorn and marveling at the way wind-up music boxes had gone unchanged since their day. They heard the door close and descended on me like eagles seeking my congealed custard liver. 6 women, friends from my mother's regular salon, no doubt, began peppering me with the usual questions about cravings and kicking and what sort of music I was playing for the baby. Well, if you must know, I'm playing a lot of classical music for her, like Danse Macabre. Wonderful! Squealed a woman stinking of cigarettes who I had seen as a child once or twice. Margaret? Martha? Melinda, let Hope come in and have a seat. She's the only one with a load she'd like to take off. Mother saved me from the lot of child-eating lamia, but to what rescue? I walked into a living room of saccharine packet pink balloons, tassels and table settings. A haphazard bundle of flower crowns Mother must have ideated through Facebook was piled up on the side table, where Dad usually arranged his beer bottles during football games. Packages of presents tied up in champagne paper and carnation ribbons waited on the coffee table, with sprigs of baby's breath tucked beneath the bows. Finger sandwiches and goblets of milk sat around on every surface next to glasses of sparkling rosé, and the old corduroy couch wore a rose-patterned slipcover. I was clutching my stomach like a bowling ball and almost succeeded in sitting down before Mother cried out. "The cake! Oh, Hope, tell me you brought us a cake like you promised. You didn't forget." Her tone was accusatory rather than accommodating. If I had forgotten it, she'd probably send someone out for one from the grocery store, which would have been better than anything I'd made. Yet I did have a cake. It was waiting out of sight and out of mind. It's still in the car, in the carrier in the back seat. I'm so sorry. I can barely carry myself around these days, and I'm so forgetful. Impish, knowing smiles sprouted on the faces of the women, and 2 of them started arguing over who would go and fetch it. They went out together and came back with the pink plastic dome from which my attempt would soon be revealed. My whole body throbbed with an invisible urgency, and I told myself I was still 3 weeks out. I went to the bathroom while they found a place for the cake, and when I shut the door, I turned the fan and the faucet on to drown them out. In the mirror, I exhaled until the glass fogged. The aroma of cake was still on my breath. I could hear my heart thumping in my throat, but I looked well. Drugstore makeup could go quite far these days. I wiped tears from beneath my eyes and reapplied my mascara, daubing at the streaks with squares of toilet paper until I resembled a normal person and not one who was replacing herself with boxed cake. The mirror assured me they didn't know I poured hot milk into the empty frosting cans and gulped the sweet dregs. They didn't know I folded old, stale chunks of crumbling cake into new dough. They didn't know I discharged rainbow-speckled white batter from my weeping yeast infection. Someone screamed. They must have lifted the dome. I washed my hands and grimaced in disgust at the inescapable vanilla sugar fragrance of the soap. When I returned from the bathroom, they were all clapping and beaming at me like I had delivered a healthy baby girl. Instead, what I had delivered was a lopsided, half-melted confetti cake which had suffered in the car ride. The unsteady text on top read, "Sweetest new life in pink icing." And before I could request my sentence be commuted, they were already cutting it into slices and passing them around on pink paper plates. Melinda handed me a big one and a tall wine glass full of milk. My stomach turned, but I eased myself onto the couch across from my mother and ate dutifully while the others tasted anemic forkfuls and nodded to each other. Great flavor! Amazing, Hope, you're so good at this. Mummies just understand how to bake. That mummy magic starts in the womb. There, surrounded by women twice my age, I began to feel uncomfortable pangs and twists in my stomach. No, lower. Either my innards were finally rebelling against my bizarre singular diet, or I was going to be early. I was surrounded by Midwestern middle-class laughter, by rosy cheeks and bottle blondes. Me, the dark daughter of a loveless, God-fearing household of banal wife beatings and foundation tips to cover black eyes. I didn't want to give birth there in that room. I wanted to explode. I wanted to tear out my false eyelashes with my real ones and break off my press-ons against the edge of the table. Instead, I leaned back into the couch cushions, set down my dishes, and felt my walls parting with a gush of sweetly scented sugar water which soaked my hosiery in the floor. Mother shrieked, She's, oh, Hope, oh my stars! Her words flailed with the same frantic uselessness as her hands, and the other women seemed no better equipped to handle my giving birth right there in front of them. They had all been through the battle themselves. Doubtless some of them bore scars and medals, but they had doctors, nurses, and epidurals. I had day-drunk housewives and acetaminophen. They simply stared, uncertain and unprepared, their day of celebration for my baby ruined by the premature arrival of the baby itself. I reached beneath my skirt for my sopping underwear and tugged them down around my knees. Slowly, I lowered myself onto the floor beside the coffee table and pulled my dress up to my waist, while contractions ached dully in my back and pelvis. I was splitting open like a candy shell over a bite of chocolate. There was no hope, no hospital within an hour's drive, and these women were swirling with alcohol even at this early hour. Yet, as quickly as the pain and pressure had started, I began to feel at ease. My baby must have been merciful, or else she was dissolved into a liquid and, mixed with afterbirth, would pour from me as water from a ewer. I pushed and pressed and gasped for air. Someone held my head. I couldn't see who. "It's a miracle," someone said. Another agreed. "A home birth, just like my mother's," came another voice, shrill with excitement. I was speechless. I could only scream, and even then, they made me bite a throw pillow which became inundated with my drooling sobs. As bad as it wasn't as bad as I had heard, and maybe I would be spared a difficult birth. It was recompense for the pain and shame which had started the whole process. It had to be. Except what came from between my legs was not a bouncing ball of clay-soft arms and legs. No blood-covered crown emerged from me, no mucus. Only a sludge of icing and cake emerged. And with a howl, a form presented itself within the mess. The first gurgling cries of my baby from a throat of crumb, wet with yellow oil and speckled rainbow all the way down. I gave birth to the bun I had baked in my natal oven. No, the cake. It was the cake that had been inside me all along, and now it clawed the air with clumsy fingers, and the first sounds it heard were the screams of the other women. What would my father have said? One less mouth to feed? I craned my neck to see my baby writhing in a puddle of component parts, and runny yolks of eggs half incorporated into the batter. It was alive, but human only in shape and cry. An undeniable urge of protection overcame me as I reached out to gather it up in my arms. My head swam, my heart raced, and my vision was blurred as my grasping mother approached to snatch it from my arms. She was no mother to me now, but a predator come to take what I had made. I arched down and shoved my face into the yowling mess, taking desperate mouthfuls of white cake and the sweet fireworks of colored sprinkles melted into its body. I chewed living frosting in layers between spongy skin and bone. I devoured every last bite of my baby, because if I could not keep this one, I would need the strength to make another.
That was Nicoletta Giuseffi's One in the Oven, as read by Doolin. Nikolle is a writer and voice actor. She performs for a number of popular and award-winning podcasts such as the No Sleep Podcast, Far-Fetched Fables, and Tales to Terrify. To learn more about Nikolle, visit her website at NicolleDoolin.com. Thank you, Nikolle. Well, children of the night, the hour is late, and we've run out of tales to tell. For now. Tales to Terrify is made possible by the tremendous generosity of our supporters on Patreon and PayPal. Incredible fans like Lestle Baxter, Amanda Carrillo, Amanda Gottfried, and Orion D, Hegre, whose generous support keeps these lights on and flickering ominously. If you're not a supporter, head over to patreon.com/Tales to Terrify. You'll find all kinds of perks, like ad-free episodes, bonus content, and one-of-a-kind collectibles. Every dollar goes back into this show, and we appreciate your support so much. Want another way to support the show that doesn't cost you a cent? Head over to Podchaser, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts and drop us a 5-star review. You'll not only put an unnaturally wide smile on our faces, but help new listeners discover our terrifying tales, too. You can show your love of the show out in the world with some Tales to Terrify merch. TalesToTerrify.com/merch will take you to our TeePublic store, where we've got a great collection of creepy custom and curated designs. Tales to Terrify is produced by Seth Williams, Meredith Morgenstern, Andrew Gibson, Crystal Hammond, Spencer Disparty, and myself, Drew Sebastini, with original theme by Nebulous Entertainment. Tales to Terrify is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Join us again next week as we feel the bitter bite of envy with more Tales to Terrify.